Hello, everyone. I'm Anthony Young. I'm the director of the Cornell Center for Integrative Developmental Science, and I have the great pleasure of introducing today's speaker, Dr. Harry Reis. Dr. Reis is Dean's Professor of Psychology at the University of Rochester. We was just chatting that I think he spent much of his career in the state of New York. He received his BS from City College of New York, and then his PhD from NYU before moving up north to the University of Rochester, which is again just a sort of a stone's throw away from Ithaca. He is the past president of the International Society for the Study of Personal Relationships, as well as the past president of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology. He's a leading figure in the field of social psychology. He's been credited with helping launch the study of relationship science. This work has made significant contributions to our understanding of intimacy and attachment. His work has been funded by the National Science Foundation, as well as the National Institute of Mental Health. He's received numerous awards, including the Distinguished Career Award from the International Association for Relationship Research, as well as a Distinguished Contributions to Social Personality Psychology from SPSP. But perhaps most impressive is his recent appearance on the podcast Hidden Brain, which I very much enjoyed. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing his talk today. So with that, Harry, if you're ready, please share with us your slides and take it away.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Anthony. I've been an admirer of the work that you and your students have done for a long time, and it's great to finally have a chance to meet. I'm gonna, and I hope we can meet in person sometime soon. I'm gonna share my screen, and hopefully I can make this window work. Does this look all right? Okay. I should tell you all that I'm not very good at monitoring chat during these Zoom talks. So I would be delighted if you would just shout and interrupt with questions so that I can hear them. That would be absolutely fine with me. So don't worry about my thinking it was rude or something like that. How long should I plan on talking? I've got lots of stuff and I could go on forever probably. And
I would say, Harry, until 1 or so, and then we had 15 minutes for Q&A, so maybe an hour.
Okay, I'll just talk and we'll see where it goes. And I've got some sort of extra slides at the end, so if any questions come up about things that I'm happy to sort of transition to them. So, you let me know what works for you and then we'll take it from there. So I've been interested in this topic of relationships for a long time. It's interesting that I started out in graduate school in social psychology in 1970. And at that time, there was no such thing as studying relationships in social psychology. And so, I didn't do that kind of work because I didn't know it actually existed. But I think that I've always been interested in relationships, and Hidden Brain got me talking about that. So if you heard the podcast, you heard me talk about the records I used to keep in junior high school. But what I was able to do in graduate school was deal with this question here of, to really begin to think about what makes people happy. Of course, positive psychology didn't exist at that time. And so the conversations about what makes people happy were really about not doing what makes people unhappy. And I really kind of floundered with that topic, to be honest, until some of this other work started being done that pointed out very simply that the thing that makes people most happy in life is their relationships. You can find almost any literature review, podcast, blog that deals with that question. concludes that it's something about the nature of social connections. You know, Ed Diener, who he was called Dr. Happy, and he he very clearly said it was social confidence. David Myers called it a deep truth, and a literature review that Sonia Lyubomirsky and her colleagues did way back in 2005 concluded that better social relationships are the thing that matters. And this dovetails with pop psych as well. Time magazine did an issue of this. I don't remember the date of this. This is pretty dated by now. But if you look at, they did a big survey in conjunction with Gallup. And if you see the things that made people most happy, relationships with children, friends and friendships, contributing to the lives of others, relationship with spouse, partner, love life, all those things are the things that work out best. Even, well, actually, let me skip that one. I'll come back to that one. You know, my favorite example of this is the meta-analytic review that Julianne Holt-Lundstad did back in 2010, where they found that social relationships, being socially integrated, means having connections with people in your community, having supportive relationships is more qualitative in nature. And they found that those are things that lower the odds of dying before your time. And in fact, being socially integrated has a greater impact on premature mortality than smoking and obesity. And, you know, we still see lots of no smoking ads on TV. When was the last time you saw an ad telling you that you should further your relationships with other people? I mean, it doesn't exist, but it may start existing. I don't know if any of you caught this yesterday, but the Surgeon General of the US, the report released yesterday about the importance of social connection and social relationships in avoiding loneliness and avoiding premature mortality. And he very much called it a call to arms for more research, for more treatment, for more interventions. And I have the report, and if any of you want to see the copy of the report, I'd be glad to email it to you. But what's particularly good is that the report is accompanied by a toolkit about what the kinds of things that people can actually do to build their relationships and prevent loneliness. And the report is remarkable because it's not just full of commonplace platitudes. It's got a lot of really good relationship science research in it. There were about 60 or 80 consultants who provided that content. I was one of them, which is how I knew about this in advance. And so, you know, that leads to the important question for us as researchers of, you know, I don't think there's any reason anymore to doubt that relationships are one of the most fundamental sources of well-being in life. Question is, what is it about relationships and how does that actually work? And you can find as many constructs in for identifying relationships in our literature as you can find people studying things. Here's a little list of just a handful of things that have been talked about in the literature as being beneficial to relationships and health and well-being. And of course, the question is, what do they have in common? What's the essence of them? What's the most important thing? And I sometimes think when you're looking at all these things, you know, we come up with words, we come up with constructs. We do that for a variety of reasons that I won't go into because they're more political than they are scholarly. But what I've been engaged in for quite some time now is trying to figure out, what do all these different kinds of relationship qualities have in common? What makes them thrive? What is kind of the gut essence of these phenomena? And what I came up with quite a number of years ago is the idea that perceived partner responsiveness to the self is what makes all this work. That is, perceived partner responsiveness is the sort of core essence of close relationships that make them so beneficial to our well-being. Now, this idea grew out of this model, which most of you have probably seen. It's almost ancient history by now. What is that? 36 years ago. Phil Shaver and I came up with this when he was still a Western New Yorker. And we spent a lot of time arguing and playing darts to try to figure out exactly what this model ought to look like. And at that time, we were really interested in the idea of intimacy per se. And what we wanted to do, in contrast to the existing literature at the time, was to characterize intimacy as an interpersonal process. If you went by the literature at that time, you would have said that what intimacy was about was either a motive that individuals had or a behavior that individuals did, that behavior being self-disclosure. So at that time, all the work on intimacy was really sort of focused on this part on the left of the bottle down here. And we were very much focused on the idea that the other person's response, that what the other person did was actually important to the process as well. And that got us thinking about how the other person's response is experienced by the first person. And by experience, that's where we came up with this model here, where we characterized intimacy and later perceived partner responsiveness in terms of three qualities. Feeling understood in the cognitive sense of another, feeling that another person really gets what you're about. Feeling validated in the sense of being appreciated and feeling that other people respect your point of view. And feeling cared for in the sense that other people are going to take care of your needs, are going to protect you, are going to help you deal with crises and problems when they occur. So when we developed the model, we put those three components in. I guess I would like to just briefly review why those three components are all essential. I don't think you can really pull them apart. I don't think you can separate them. I think they're all important. The one that seems most controversial to people at the time is the understanding part, the idea that feeling understood is what's really important. And we think that feeling understood is really important because it fosters authenticity. If other people express caring and liking for you, but that caring and liking is not based on who you are or who you believe that you are, then it won't feel authentic and it may not actually feel real. And what we think is that understanding may not be the only thing that matters in and of itself, but it's absolutely essential as a foundation for the effects of validation. If you just think about it for a moment, if somebody expresses respect and appreciation for something that you don't feel is the real you, then that respect and validation doesn't really go very far. We actually did an experiment of this quite a number of years ago. I put it in these slides just because it's one of my favorite unpublished studies. We never, for a variety of reasons, we never got around to publishing this, but what we did in this study was that we were actually able to empirically separate understanding from validation. So it was a stranger interaction, and what it basically involved was having a person present themselves to an interviewer and then having the interviewer give them feedback, and the feedback either showed that they really understood who the person was, or alternatively that they just were clueless as to who the person was, and then that they respected the other person, or that they were really not very validating of the person. And what you can see from these data is that validation has a nice, strong positive effect in the condition where the interviewer is showing that they understand you. But in the condition where the interviewer doesn't get you, validation has a far weaker effect. People, my sense of what happened in the studies is that people would sort of, okay, this is fine. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want you to, go further, because when you figure out what I'm really about, maybe you're not going to like that so much. So, and you can, of course, see that when people do feel understood, but when the feedback is invalidating, in other words, critical, that is really what makes people feel quite negative toward the interviewer. So our model really works on the idea that feeling understood, it allows supportive caregiving to be matched to actual needs. It allows people to feel real in their interactions. I've done some work lately on the idea of chemistry in interpersonal connections, and we really feature the idea of understanding in that chemistry model, simply because people, when people feel that sense of connection, that gut feeling of chemistry with another person, it really involves feeling like the other person gets who you are. And so it allows people to feel real in these situations. And there's been work that's been done recently that shows that feeling understood even facilitates cooperative conflict resolution. And that's something that I think is really sort of exciting. The model also includes caring. I don't know how much I really need to explain about caring, because it's kind of obvious that responsiveness would involve feeling that another person is caring for your needs. It relates to a sense of having a communal relationship, and it certainly relates to the idea that that another person will be available should you need support. As we all know, the literature on received support is somewhat ambiguous. Received support sometimes is a good thing, sometimes it's not such a good thing. But there's no doubt that perceived availability of support, the feeling that there are other people available who could help you if you needed it. And Anthony, you and Emre have done some of the coolest studies of that support process. So I don't need to tell you about all that. The model that we have worked on over the years is essentially a model that responsiveness fuels what Barb Fredrickson calls a broaden and build cycle. And by broaden and build, what we mean is it's not a static process that sort of works from responsiveness to outcomes and then you're done, but rather it's much more of a feedback loop. And one of the things I want to emphasize that it has been somewhat controversial in the literature is whether the actual enactment of responsiveness leads to the perception of responsiveness. There are some who would have us believe that responsiveness is almost like a personality trait, or perhaps we could call it a projection effect, but that perceiving that other people value and respect you is something that is more of a characteristic of the person. And there undoubtedly are characteristics of persons that are relevant to that process. But what we've tried to emphasize in some of the work that I've been doing lately is that there is this dyadic effect of one person behaves in a way that leads to the other person feeling responsive, and that fuels outcomes, and that makes you more willing to enact responsiveness towards the other person, and we get this nice little cyclical model. We've supported this in quite a number of studies, some published, some not published, but it's important to, even though I'm going to be talking later, mostly about perceived partner responsiveness. But I do want to get across the point that we don't think of perceived partner responsiveness as a characteristic of persons. We see it as something that arises out of interaction with other individuals, something that characterizes relationships and not just individuals. And in fact, I've been doing some work lately with a colleague in Israel, Guy Itchikov, who is a listening researcher. And Guy and I met about 3 years ago, and we realized that what he calls high quality listening is what we call enacted responsiveness. It works. The concepts are so similar that they're probably the same thing. They're probably just the same construct packaged in a different package. And we've actually been working on developing this recently. And I'd be happy to say more about that if anyone is interested in that. The idea of perceived partner responsiveness has been related to a lot of different things. I was somewhat almost embarrassed when Gordon and Chen called it the bedrock of intimacy. Kind of nice to have your work called the bedrock of anything, really. I've got a list here of various things that have been related to perceived partner responsiveness over the 20 or 25 years that concept's been out there. You can see there's a lot of good stuff on that list. Most of the things that I put here are interpersonal in nature, that is, are interpersonal kinds of outcomes. But what I thought it might be fun to do today is talk more about the benefits of perceived partner responsiveness for the individual. That is, to talk about how perceived partner responsiveness actually benefits individuals as they go about their social lives. So this is very much of a bringing a relationship construct back into social psychology, and particularly into the psychology of the self. What we believe is that one of the values that we get from feeling that others are responsive to us is that we feel accepted, we feel a sense of safety, we feel a sense that our need to belong has been fulfilled. And what's important about that in the social world is that allows people to relax some of the defenses that we have in connecting to the world. We all know the social psychology literature is full of defenses that people do. Sometimes undergrads think of this as sort of cute little behaviors. I don't really think of them that way. What they are is various ways we have of protecting ourselves against the vulnerability that we might feel if we really opened ourselves up to feedback and to the social world. And the social psych literature very much characterizes these self-protective behaviors as things that we do to protect our self-concept and sort of prevent the social world from having any kind of impact on us. And so as a result of that, there is this whole literature on self-affirmation that talks about how you can make people feel more confident in themselves and less likely to do this. So there are a number of different manipulations that are done of self-affirmation, where people, might make a list of what their important values are and talk about those kinds of things. And that's all great. I don't have a problem with that kind of work. But, there's always this idea of social psychology. And the question is, what happens to these self-protective tendencies if the social world is more accepting and more validating of you? And what I'd like to do today is talk about 4 different phenomena that are all manifestations of these self-protective behaviors that are lessened by perceived responsiveness, and alternatively that become magnified when people feel that their social environment is unresponsive. So I'll try to get through these. Some of these are work that's been published so far. The last one in particular, Prejudice Towards Outgroup, is work that is new, that we're just that's under review right now. But these are all examples of self-protective motivations that can be ameliorated when people feel that the social environment is more accepting. So let's start with ego defensive self-enhancement. Ego defensive self-enhancement, as undoubtedly most of you know, is the idea that people want to believe that they have positive qualities. And as a result, we often perceive ourselves as better than average. We perceive ourselves in various ways. So there are all these different effects that self chapters in social psychology textbooks always list. And we've done a bunch of studies. I'm going to tell you about two of them today. The idea here is that if we do these things in order to enhance our sense of worth, if the social environment gives us feedback that we are respected and cared for and appreciated, then there is less of a need to do that. So the first is the better than average effect. I love this picture. This is not my cat George, but my cat George looks just like that. And he definitely thinks of himself as a lion. So the better than average effect is the argument that we all believe we're better than average. And of course, we can't all be better than average, right? Some people call this the Lake Wobegon effect, because Garrison Keillor on NPR used to talk about Lake Wobegon as the town where all the children are above average. So what we did in this study was we asked university students to rate themselves on a series of 21 characteristics. I've listed 3 of them here. How logical are you? How motivated are you? How intelligent are you? All of them are positive characteristics. But before we had them do that rating, we asked them to do a perceived responsiveness manipulation. And the perceived responsiveness manipulation was asking them to describe someone who's interested in what you're thinking and feeling, someone who values you and esteems you, shortcomings and all. In an unresponsive condition, we ask them to describe someone who knows you fairly well, but often seems discouraging, someone who's critical and unwilling to be helpful. And then we had 2 control conditions in this study. The first was somebody who knows you, but not particularly well. So presumably that's someone that would not be particularly responsive or unresponsive. And then an organizational tool for something that was not interpersonal. Everyone follow? Everyone see what this study is about? So the results are pretty clear cut. You'll see the red bar here shows that when people had written about somebody who was responsive, they show less of a tendency to describe themselves as above average. It's still above 0. You know, in theory, across the whole sample, 0 should be the average response. And so there's still some evidence of this self-enhancement effect, but it's less than in the unresponsive condition, and it's significantly less than in the control conditions as well. So what this suggests is that there's less need to build yourself up when you believe that others are, when you're thinking about the fact that others are being responsive to yourself. We also looked at this in terms of hindsight bias. This is really one of my favorite studies. I love this one. So what people saw is a box that looks like this. So we all know you go to these little internet quizzes that ask you questions that are, have answers that you probably couldn't guess, and you want to see how much do you know. But what we did was show people the answer. So people saw this entire box just like this. And then we asked them, what would you have said if we had not told you the answer? And this is a standard paradigm used in hindsight studies. And the idea here is that the closer you say you were to the real answer, the more likely you're showing, oh, yes, I knew that all along. And of course, most people don't necessarily know these things all along. You might know the answer to some of these questions, but across the 13 questions, you probably wouldn't know most of the answers to them. I certainly didn't know the answers to them. And so the closer your answers are in z-score terms, in a standardized variable, the more you're showing hindsight bias. The larger your discrepancy from the actual answer, the less hindsight bias you're showing. Okay, so, and what we show, but then before they do this task, we did a different manipulation of perceived partner responsiveness, because what we wanted to do here was we wanted to get away from a really strongly interpersonal manipulation. And so we used a technique that Norbert Schwartz developed, where you ask people to do a task that either is very easily, which sort of brings to consciousness the idea, oh yes, other people really are kind and considerate and really liked me, or alternatively, you make it really hard. So this condition here, the top one, is one that we consider to be a perceived responsiveness manipulation. This one here is considered to be an unresponsiveness condition, because most people have trouble naming 10 kind or considerate things that their partners have done in the last 7 days. And in fact, in the feedback that participants in this study have given us, sometimes they write, it made me start to question my relationships because I couldn't think of 10 things. So the idea is that it's 10 kind or considerate things are just not very accessible. And then there's a control condition where people, again, describe an acquaintance. And here are the results of the study. And what you see is that in the responsiveness condition, this is a z-score summed across all 13 items. And what this shows is that in the responsive condition, people show less hindsight bias than in the unresponsive condition, where people show more hindsight bias. So presumably, what the unresponsive condition does is it makes people have more of a need to show, yes, I'm smart, I knew this stuff all along, you can't trick me. But in the responsive condition, people are more willing to say, huh, yeah, I really didn't know that, I'm off. So that we have other studies in this line of work also, but if there aren't any questions, I'll move on to a different topic that takes this a little further away from standard social psych studies. I see a hand from Matthew.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So I was wondering about the sort of hindsight bias test where you gave them like the Eiffel, how large is the Eiffel Tower, and then you put the answer below it.
Right.
So I was wondering if there might also be a sort of anti-bias almost, where it's like, because when I was looking through this, I was like, how many paintings did Picasso create? I would have guessed 100. How tall's the Eiffel Tower? I would have guessed 500. But I started thinking like, what if I'm specifically reducing my answer because I'm aware of this hindsight bias? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think there probably was an element of that. I think that what we believe is that that would be a constant across all of the conditions. So if you look in here, there may well have been an element of that, but you wouldn't expect that to be differential in the three conditions. So if it lessened the extent of hindsight bias that people had, or maybe that it raises hindsight bias, you would expect that to be reasonably constant across these three conditions. So I think the point is that even over and above that tendency, people would still show more hindsight bias in the unresponsive condition than in the responsive condition. So, okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about attitudes. People often use their attitudes to defend their sense of being a smart person who has good values and a good sense of what's important. Clark and Wegner have called this the psychological immune system, that we want to hold the right attitudes. We want to believe that what we believe is correct and valid and meaningful and coherent. And so when we are faced with information that might contradict our attitudes, we often defend ourselves in various ways. We search for attitude consistent information. We dismiss conflicting information. We overperceive how correct our attitudes are, just because this sense of attitudinal coherence and correctness allows us to feel like we're competent, capable, smart, effective human beings. And so one of the things we reasoned is that if that is the case, then when people are feeling understood and validated by their social environment, they should be more willing and more able to tolerate attitude inconsistent information, more willing to accept, I might not be right about this kind of thing. And on the other side of the coin, when people are not feeling accepted and validated, they may show more of a tendency to dismiss information that is inconsistent with their attitudes and beliefs. So we've done a series of studies on these. Here's the general model that we used in these studies. The model is in the example I'll give you, we used attitudes toward genetically modified food, but we've done it with some other attitudes as well. So we asked people to first indicate what their attitude toward genetically modified food was all about, whether they were pro or con that kind of food, and then to write a paragraph advocating for their position just to make their belief really salient. We then did one of the two perceived partner responsiveness manipulations that I showed you in the previous studies. Some of the studies used one, some of the studies used the other, but we don't see much of a difference between them. And then we have three different outcome variables, and I'll show you these outcome variables as we get to them, so I won't explain them right now. So the first study used a very standard measure of open-mindedness in the attitude change literature, and that's simply to do a free-for-all thought listing technique, where you say, just tell me all the things you can think of about genetically modified food. And people are writing sentences. It's all free response. And what you do is you compute the number of thoughts that oppose their initial attitudes divided by the total number of thoughts. So you're computing a ratio of, so it's a measure of cognitive accessibility. It's how accessible are elements of the attitude, elements of what you believe about the attitude object that are inconsistent with what you actually think about it. And what you can see here is that after they underwent the responsiveness manipulation, people mention more attitude inconsistent information than in the control condition. And when they feel that others have been unresponsive, they mention fewer attitude inconsistent ideas. We then used a more subtle technique from, this is a different study, but the same construct, from the attitude literature, a measure of simultaneous accessibility. A measure of simultaneous accessibility, what this is the extent to which pro and con thoughts come to mind quickly and equally quickly. So people are given a list of different attitude objects, and you indicate how quickly they indicate whether they believe that score or not. And the measure of simultaneous accessibility is a measure that looks at whether pro and con statements occur quickly and equally quickly. So the higher the scores on this measure, the greater it means that, the more it means that pro and con thoughts are equally accessible to people's minds. And what you can see is that the measure is much stronger in the responsive condition than the control condition. And the unresponsive condition, it's actually, the measure is exactly equal to 0, so it doesn't show up on this chart. Again, suggesting the idea that these thoughts are cognitively accessible. Furthermore, if you give them semantic differential items and simply ask them, to what extent do you believe that this is true about genetically modified food? And then you look at the extent to which people endorse both pro and con features, you can see that, again, people will endorse both features more in the responsive condition than the unresponsive condition, which indicates that there's some degree of objective ambivalence. I don't have a slide of this, but interestingly, another question that we asked in this study was the extent to which people were aware of being ambivalent. And one of the things you find is that in the responsive condition, people are also more aware of being ambivalent, which implies, of course, that it's easier to live with your ambivalence if you feel that others are being responsive, whereas in the unresponsive condition, people are more uncomfortable with it, and so they express less acceptance of their ambivalence. My favorite study in this series, though, is this one. And this is a measure that builds off the work of Kim Reis, that simply asks, how certain are you that your attitude towards genetically modified food is correct? That is, how sure are you that what you believe is really the right belief? And what you can see is that in the responsive condition, people are less certain that they're correct. I really like this result because it really speaks to some of the issues that we seem to be experiencing in the world today. But one of the things that's also cool about it is that if you sort of think about the idea of responsiveness, you might have predicted exactly the opposite. That is, you might have said, when people are reinforced, when people receive positive feedback from other people, they should be more confident. They should be more self-assured. They should feel more of a belief in their correctness. But no, and you get exactly the opposite, and that's exactly what we expected. And you can see that in a daily diary study as well. This was another daily diary study that we did that simply asked people about, what did you do today that expressed an openness to alternative views? So, did you read something or listen to a radio broadcast where somebody was expressing a point of view that was different than your own? Or did you admit to someone that you were wrong about something? Did you concede a point of difference to another person? Did you explore ideas that were inconsistent with what you believed? And we looked at that as a function of whether they felt that their social network had been responsive to them on that day. And what you can see here is that people seem to be more open to alternative points of view when they feel that their network has been responsive. So that speaks to the idea, again, that people are simply more willing to be open-minded. I'll in a study coming up, I'll call this intellectual humility, which is simply, I'm not the only person who has beliefs, and I might not be right, being the point of view. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll just skip quickly through. We've done some work on emotion regulation. Well, let's see. Yeah, I guess there's enough time to talk about this. So we've done other work on emotion regulation. Now, this is a little different than the studies I've just presented, because this is more about emotional vulnerability toward a relationship partner. When you're emotionally open, that signals risk. Why is it signal risk? Because if you're telling other people about something you need, about something you feel scared about something you are vulnerable toward, it opens you up to the possibility of a negative judgment. They could say, it's stupid to feel that way. They could take advantage of you, perhaps. And we know from many, many studies that when people feel vulnerable, they self-protect by shutting down, by not being open. So one of the things we thought is that a perceived partner responsiveness manipulation may simply have the effect of lessening people's need to self-protect by not opening up. Or in other words, what a responsiveness manipulation will do is encourage people to be open with their partners. So in this study, we use something called the Trier social stress task. Perhaps you've come across this. It's a very common task that's used in the stress literature, because what it involves is telling people that they're going to be videotaped delivering a 5-minute talk on a given topic, and that talk is then going to be judged by experts. People hate this task. Now, we didn't actually do it, but we give them, that we tell them that we're going to do it. But prior to doing that, we did a responsiveness manipulation, and then we asked them to send an email to their romantic partner. So these are all people who are in pre-existing romantic relationships. And we actually had them open up a computer and actually send a message. So we actually coded the messages that they actually sent. And one thing we then did was look at negative emotion words. We used Luke, the linguistic inquiry word count method. I don't know if you all know, but it's an automated way, simply looking for how many words expressing negative emotions were in that message. And you can see that in the responsive condition, people were more willing to use negative emotion words. Interestingly enough, we weren't successful with the unresponsive condition. The difference between the unresponsive condition and the control condition was not significant. And I think that may be because the task is really so aversive that people are going to want to open up. Here are some examples of what people wrote to their partners. I love this SOS help. People just don't like this task. We coded it for other things as well. We coded it for the expression of anxiety, and you can see that that works out the same. More coded anxiety in the responsive condition. And we also coded it for expressions of support seeking. And again, you can see that that's higher as well. We've also shown this in a daily diary study. In this daily diary study, we asked everybody to name somebody who they're close to that they would talk to every day. So we didn't want to limit this to romantic relationships. We wanted it to be something that applied to close relationships as well. And we asked them how responsive the person had been that day. And then we asked them how much they opened up in expressing negative feelings on that day. And you can imagine how that study worked out. Here are the various effects in that study. All of them are showing that on days in which people felt that their partners were more responsive, they were more willing to express emotions, both positive and negative emotions. It's kind of interesting that the effects are actually stronger for positive emotions. And this is something we've seen in various other ways. People are more willing to be open about negative emotions than they are about positive emotions, perhaps because they're a little bit afraid of boasting and bragging. They're afraid that if the other person is not responsive, it'll kind of destroy the buzz that they're getting from the good thing. So I can talk some more about that also, but I want to sort of get on to talking about the work we've been doing lately on responsiveness and prejudice. This is new work that I've been doing with Guy Itchikoff as well. We were intrigued by the idea that prejudice may reflect people's feelings of a lack of acceptance and a lack of understanding by their social network. So this comes from the theories about prejudice that think of prejudice as a symbolic threat towards one's in-group. That is, you feel a sense of prejudice when you feel that you're not being accepted by other people, you're not being accepted by other groups. And one way you can maintain your self-image is by evaluating a stigmatized group in a more negative way. That is, you can maintain your sense of self-image against the threat of rejection and a lack of belonging simply by showing prejudice towards an outgroup. Conversely, when you feel well accepted, when you don't feel this sense of threat, there may be less reason to hold outgroups in contempt. We use a very similar paradigm to what we did before in these other studies, but here we're also going to be looking at mediating variables. So these are both ideas that I've talked about already. Lack of intellectual humility, intolerance of ambivalence. These are both characteristics that have been related to prejudice. And what we wanted to show in this work was that those might be mediators of the effect of responsiveness on prejudice. So this work follows the same paradigm as the earlier work. We start off by asking people to write a brief essay about a social group towards which you hold a negative attitude. And we actually gave people a list like this. In some of the studies we've done on this, we actually gave them a list and asked them to pick the group that they don't feel positively to. In other versions of the study, we've actually given them a group that we know to be stigmatized in the context of the sample. And the results come out the same way, regardless of how we do it. We then do a pretest attitude rating towards the chosen group, which is a way of making sure that they really do have a negative attitude towards that group. They then do either of the perceived partner responsiveness manipulations. In the particular study I'm going to show you, it's the one where they write about somebody who shows a lot of respect and valuing and understanding for them, or somebody who doesn't who shows contempt and scorn and a lack of understanding for them. And then we again ask them, what do you think about the outgroup? And then we also ask how certain they are that what they believe about that group is correct. And then we ask them to rate positive and negative features of that outgroup and look at the degree of ambivalence. That is the actual lack of difference between positive and negative features, so that you're ambivalent if you express both positive and negative features toward that group. We have a series of studies. This is one of them. And what you can see, and this is looking at attitude change from the first rating to the second rating. And what you can see is in the responsive condition, people show a more positive attitude toward the outgroup following the manipulation. In the control group, they actually are slightly more positive. And in the unresponsive condition, they actually become more negative, significantly more negative toward the outgroup, presumably because they're defending against the sense of threat. Furthermore, if you then do a mediation analysis, I assume you're all familiar with these kind of pictures in these models. If you look at intellectual humility, namely how certain are you about what you believe, and how much are you willing to acknowledge that there's both positive and negative features about the outgroup, you get a significant indirect effect for both of those mediators, which suggests that the processes that we talked about in the attitude change work earlier are at least part of the reasons why there is a change in attitude for favorability toward the outgroup. We've also shown that this holds in everyday life. This was a daily diary study and what we wanted to do in this study was both to show that this goes on over time, as well as that it is not a function of affect or social desirability. So in this study, what we did was that we established how responsive they feel that their social network was, but then we waited 3 days to assess these other characteristics, and then we asked about their behavior intentions towards the outgroup. So a sample question is, to what extent are you willing to watch an interview with someone who advocates in favor of the opposite side of your attitude? So it looked at the extent to which people would be willing to do something. And because we did it on a different day, it's not just a case of ratings bias. And even when you control for affect and social desirability, you still see that perceived responsiveness relates to people's willingness to engage in behavior, or at least people's willingness to consider engaging in behaviors that are show some sense of involvement with the outgroup and the possibility of changing your belief about that. So these are examples of the kinds of studies that we've done, and I can see that I'm just about out of time. The takeaway message here is that we know that responsiveness is good for relationships, but I would like to also make the argument that responsiveness is good for individuals. The many ways in which people protect their sense of self-worth in everyday life, they're often self-defeating. They're often things that cut us off from being open-minded, that cut us off from really understanding who we are. And these self-protections, they're not just about self-worth. They're not just about self-esteem. They're not just about self-construal. They're about how we connect with other people. And I think that this can open us up to a truly social perspective on social psychology. And that's something that's been a sort of meta agenda of mine for many, many years, is to make social psychology really social. So thank you for listening to all this, and I will be glad to answer whatever questions you might have.
Thank you, Harry, for that very stimulating presentation. I will invite those in attendance to, if you have a question, please just raise your virtual hand and I'll call upon you.
Yes, and I can't see all of your pictures, so Anthony, you'll have to mediate.
Yep, I'm happy to do that. And if you want, Harry, to unshare your slides. You probably will be able to see folks better.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'll do that. Okay, now I can see you all, and I can even open the chat too.
Well, I may take this opportunity as host to maybe ask a couple of questions. So, you mentioned dart throwing earlier. As someone who's really interested in a lot of this work, but who is not a social psychologist, I'm sort of feel like an outsider here. So I wanted to see if I can throw some darts at this idea of responsiveness and get your reactions. So the one question is, the feeling aspect of partner responsiveness seems to be really crucial here, right? In terms of how it's being measured, how you feel about your partner, how much you feel he or she cares for you and understands you and so forth. If, there are affective scientists who would say, well, if it's a feeling, then maybe we should be studying this more intensively. That is to say, if it's a feeling, then it should fluctuate over time. And maybe that fluctuation might signal something about the relationship. And so I guess I wonder, I know you presented some of these daily diary studies, but I wonder how much value you see in that sort of approach to studying partner responsiveness intensively over time with the goal of trying to understand dynamic processes, or is that not at all compatible with the larger theory?
Well, I'd love to see someone study this dynamically over time. I wish I had the tools to know how to do that properly. We do, in various studies, control for what you could call a simple affective explanation, which is that it feels good or it doesn't feel good. I mean, obviously responsiveness feels good and unresponsiveness doesn't feel good. And we've made the point of, in all of our effects, they hold regard over and above just simple affective explanations. So I realize that's not what you're asking, but I just wanted to make that point. I think it's undoubtedly the case that there is an affective component. I think that responsiveness is the receptiveness to responsiveness is fairly deeply wired into our human architecture. So it's not just a cognitive sense. It certainly has a cognitive element, but it's not purely cognitive. And I think it would be fabulous to be able to study the ebb and flow of this in couples. I'm reminded of Barb Fredrickson's new work on positivity resonance, and her model of positivity resonance, I think, bears some similarity to what I'm calling responsiveness. The idea, if you think of this as a mutually reinforcing cycle, then when I feel that you've been responsive, I'm going to be more in tune with you. I'm going to be more open to you. That's going to open you up. And I think that's where this sense of chemistry that people feel with others is often comes from. So I think it would be really wonderful to do one of these studies looking at synchrony in feelings of responsiveness in a couple interaction. I think this is one of the places I think this is really interesting to study is in the sense of unresponsiveness. Conflict resolution, when you look at the idea of negative affect reciprocity, when people just are negative and they're locked into a cycle of negative affect, I think that often is coming from people's feeling that their partner is not understanding and is not making an effort to understand. I have real trouble with the word understanding in this work, because people use the word understanding in their everyday life in a way that's different than we think of it. Because when people say you don't understand me, they don't mean you're getting the facts wrong about me. They think you're not respecting and validating and caring for me. Whereas we're really trying to use the term, as a precondition for that in terms of getting the facts right. Yeah. So I hope that's at least a partial answer to.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful. Thank you. That just maybe, if I could just touch on the other side of that question, which is coming from the relationship side. You're talking about relationships, couples. I can imagine a scenario where one member of the dyad feels, yeah, I feel like my partner is responsive, but the other member doesn't feel that way, right. Which is to say, I would imagine that when you're talking about responsiveness, the benefit to the relationship is when both members feel that the other is being responsive. In other words, right. Mutual responsiveness.
Right.
And I wonder if that idea and how you go about measuring that has any traction here.
Yeah, that's a neat idea, and we actually I've thought about that. We've kind of looked at it in a not very effective way in some work. And what that work seems to show is kind of the in-between position, which is that if one person feels responded to, but the other doesn't, there's a little bit of benefit for the relationship. But you get the biggest boost when both feel that way. I've been playing around with this idea, with this new method called response surface analysis that would actually get at this. But I haven't really done anything good with it. We do have lots of data that we could use to test it. So,
very cool.
What do you think a relationship in which one person feels it and the other person doesn't is unstable?
I'd like to think so. I was asking the more empirical question of whether there's been work done in this area. I mean, I can imagine if you're studying these things dynamically, right, where you're asking people, on a daily basis, how much you feel that your partner is responsive to your needs. Right. A day in which both people feel that presumably is the best day, right?
Well, what this makes me think of is some of the work that's being done now on buffering attachment anxiety. Mm. And, there's this interesting work now that suggests that if you have an anxious partner, that if you buffer their anxiety, don't worry, honey, I'm with you, I'm not going anywhere, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That actually helps the partner deal with their anxiety.
Yeah.
But if you think about that work in a longitudinal sense,
yeah,
you realize that you're asking one partner to be Mother Teresa.
Right.
And at some point,
the
partner's going to say, I'm tired of taking care of your anxiety. How about me? So the question, I think in a single interaction and over a short period of time, I'm sure that's effective.
Yeah.
Over longer periods of time, I'm not so sure that it would work. And I think that's a really interesting question. And I'd love to see some work. We don't really have any good longitudinal studies of responsiveness. That's been one of my shortcomings in not doing some really good couples longitudinal work. I wish I'd started that some years ago.
Well, this is fascinating. I know I'm sort of taking up the time here, but if I may just ask one more question just to follow up on this idea. You mentioned earlier this idea of, I think you called it enacted responsiveness. Yeah. And I don't know this work very well, but what comes to mind is, and you tell me if I'm totally way off here, but the early studies by Niall Boger on invisible social support.
Right.
Is that related to what you're calling enacted responsiveness?
We do have some work on invisible social support. It's tricky. Okay, visible social support is sometimes considered responsive, even though it undermines people's emotional well-being. However, if you look at those studies, there's a very interesting divergence that occurs. And that's that even though visible social support makes people feel worse about themselves, they actually feel better about their relationships. We have Yuthika Girmay put together some studies using some of her data and our data in a study in analyses that look at invisible support that shows that when people experience invisible support on the next day, their relationship satisfaction goes up. I'm presuming that the mediator in that is that people feel responded to, but they don't feel that it has been supportive in the sense of helping them fix a problem. Rather, it's simply that you've been there for me kind of general thing. Now, when we do studies where we code responsiveness, a lot of the behaviors that get enacted, that get coded as responsive, are behaviors that would count as social support. And I think in most of the studies we've done, people would say that they've been supported. So I don't think it's been invisible. But I think the context of invisible support in those earlier studies of Niles really a very unusual context. It's the context of people experiencing highly stressful events, like the bar exam being one, but not the only one. And I think that social support in that context may not look like responsiveness at all. Whereas most of the kind of responsiveness that we've looked at is more like talking through a problem. Well, talking through a problem doesn't really help you prepare for the bar exam terribly well. So enacted responsiveness, I think, looks a lot like support, but what it doesn't look like, the kind of support that really undermines is the kind of support where people are saying, well, I can tell that you can't really do this, so let me do it for you. Right. And that clearly isn't considered, and people would not call that being responsive. Yeah. So it's kind of, there's some fuzziness here that I think needs to get sorted out.
Great. I have some more questions, but I'm gonna actually turn to the audience here. I see Betul, you have a hand up. You want to unmic and maybe ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It was a great talk. I really enjoyed it. I have more like a measurement question. So in the beginning, you mentioned 3 dimensions of PPR, like understanding, validation, and care. But in one of the recent papers that you published where you had a like validated measure of PPR, there doesn't seem like a lot of items about like tapping caring dimensions. Yeah. I just wanted to ask whether that was a correct interpretation.
Yeah, that's great, and you've caught me in an ambivalence. I still believe that all 3 components are important. That work came out of my collaborations with some colleagues here, Ron Rogi and Dev Krasta, who are very sort of literal-minded in their focus on measurement. And they literally took all the measures of all these constructs that are available and put them into an item response theory analysis. And what popped out was understanding and lack of validation. Now, I think it's kind of interesting that those 2 came out as separate factors, but they came out as one being positive and one being negative. And I think what happened is, I think in almost any measurement study you're going to do in this area, you're going to get separate positive and negative factors if the work is psychometrically sensitive. It's just inevitable that positive questions and negative questions are going to end up on different ends of the scale. So I'm not too perturbed by the fact that understanding and lack of validation ended up rather than both in the same direction, because I think that's sort of obvious. The fact that care didn't come out in that is a little bit concerning to me. When we separate understanding, validation, and caring in measurement work, they're highly correlated. And in fact, even when you do confirmatory factor analyses, you can't separate the factors. They don't separate. And that's I think that that's for a simple reason, and that's that in real life, they tend to go hand in hand. When we separated them in the experiment that I described to you, we worked really hard to orthogonalize those factors because it's very hard to do that in natural experience. They just co-vary so much. And I think in ordinary language, frankly, people use those terms synonymously. So I don't think they really separate out in any meaningful sense. Another way of answering your question is to say, ask someone to describe a relationship that's understanding and validating, but not caring. Now, you can do that, but I'd wager to say that it'd be very hard to think of a relationship that's really like that, where people have that. And the same thing is true for the other concepts as well. So I'm not happy that caring didn't come out in that measure. And I use both measures interchangeably. Of course, in real life, they tend to be highly correlated. So you could argue that there's not much empirical consequence to using one or the other. But I don't like that caring didn't come out in there, but that's how the data spoke. So
yeah. Following on that, so in that scale, you have like responsiveness subscale and insensitivity subscale. Right. So do you conceptualize insensitivity is like the opposite of?
Yeah, but if you look at the items, the one they called responsiveness is clearly understanding, and the one they called insensitivity is clearly lack of validation.
Lack of validation. Okay.
So it's fine with me to call them whatever they want. They took the lead on that, but it's pretty clear what those are.
Thank you.
So now, James, you've been trying to get a question in that I can see in the chat, but can't read.
It's all good. This was also kind of a measurement question of, for example, with one of the last set of studies, if you ask people to actually sit through an interview with someone they found really maybe that they disagreed with a lot. I'm just curious if you would predict that the responsiveness manipulation would affect whether the behavioral intentions showed up in real behavior.
So if somebody had actually interacted with someone from the out group?
Yeah, or let's say, right. So I think what was one of your examples that the behavioral intention to watch an interview with someone they really disagreed with.
Right.
And it struck me as like an interesting intervention would be like, see how long they actually could.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love to do that study. I think I can argue it both ways, and I'd like to see what would happen. My sense is that it wouldn't be good enough to simply look at what you could call native levels of perceived responsiveness, that I would want to really do a manipulation. Actually, let me say something stronger. Are you familiar with Art Aaron's fast friends procedure?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, I've done some work with fast friends, and I think people are interpreting fast friends wrong. And I've talked about this at length with Art, and we agree, basically. What makes fast friends work is not the openness. What makes fast friends work is that they are the kinds of questions where people are going to say, oh yeah, I can really resonate to that. I had a similar experience. One of the questions is, who would you like to have dinner? Which famous person would you like to have dinner with? And people will say Taylor Swift. Oh, I'd really like to have dinner with Taylor Swift too. People never say, that's stupid. Why did you feel that way? To those questions. So what Fast Friends does is it creates a responsive interaction. Now, what's interesting is the Fast Friends literature shows that if you bring people from groups that normally are in conflict with each other and you do Fast Friends, they like each other better. And I think that you could attribute that result to perceiving a sense of responsiveness from the other person. It's typically interpreted in terms of perceived similarity, but I think it also would be interpreted, I also think it would be due to perceived responsiveness. Sue Sprecher has actually done some work that shows that people do feel like the other person's been more responsive to them after they open up in the Fast Friends procedure. So there is some empirical evidence for that. I think there's limits to that effect, though. I think if you did some kind of a self-disclosure manipulation like that with people who are really in an antagonistic relationship, do I think it's strong enough to overcome that? No. It's one of the things we're trying to explore now is the kind of responsiveness we did is related clearly to a lowering of prejudice, but there's certainly another sort of responsiveness that would actually increase prejudice. And that is, I tell you how much I hate Trump Republicans, and you say, yeah, right, those Trump Republicans are really terrible, and you're believing that they're awful is really the right way to think. Well, that's responsive. But that's going to reinforce my prejudice rather than diminish it. So there's a sense in which responsiveness toward a prejudicial attitude can actually increase the rigidity of that belief, if not even the intensity of the belief. So that's something we're trying to figure out right now for our next set of studies, is to how you can describe that difference.
Thank you, Harry. I know we're actually over time here, but I'm dying to ask the AI question here, which is,
oh yeah, right.
Is responsiveness, uniquely human? I mean, can you train an AI to be responsive? I mean, we're talking about like visible support earlier. It strikes me that the AI would be very good at that, but you don't feel judged when you're interacting with an AI.
Well, I got two things to say about that.
Okay.
The first is that we actually have a published paper where we used a robot, and it was done by someone who's currently a postdoc at Cornell, Guy Hoffman. I'm not exactly sure where he is. I know he's not in your group. Where we had a little robot called Travis, and Travis was non-verbally and verbally responsive, but it was a Wizard of Oz manipulation. So there was actually somebody behind it that was feeding what Travis would actually say. So you could argue that's not robotic. I reviewed a paper recently done by someone else, and I don't know who it is because it was an anonymous review, where they showed that people like a responsive robot better than an unresponsive human. Well, that's not terribly surprising. But I think that I think that if you got ChatGPT to deliver responsive messages, people would like it. Now, would that be able to do some of the kinds of things we talked about in this study? If ChatGPT gave you feedback that you were, a good person and that your beliefs were really the correct beliefs, would it then lead you to feel less of a need to self-enhance? I think it probably would, but what the limits of that are, I think is a great thing that we really should do.
Well, thank you, Harry, for taking time and for being so responsive to all of these questions. It was really great to hear your work, and hopefully next time we'll find a way to get you here in person. Thanks again.
Well, it's great to meet you all, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.